There's spoilers! Look over here, I'm talking to you! There are spoilers for Season 3! And the manga! Also, have you liked and subscribed? As far as presentation is concerned, Season 3 of Attack on Titan is mostly a joy. Some of the stuff on display here is just... it's mind-blowing. In particular, these Levi scenes. I mean, just look at them. Apparently this one took the animator ERENthe Imai a whole month to complete. Honestly, I can't praise this intensive animation enough. It's truly breathtaking, beautiful work. Look at the man fly. Of course, these moments aren't exclusive to Levi. Nah, they're sprinkled in here and there throughout the third season. In addition, I also simply prefer Season 3's animation and storyboarding to Season 2's. I didn't notice any sections where still images with action lines or anything like that popped up enough to distract me. This is an incredibly strong showing, and the amount of effort and work that went into this must have been simply titanic.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Sorry. But wait, look at the time. It's a regularly scheduled complaint about the CGI Colossal Titan programming. Really though, look at him. He's an ugly boy. Honestly, at this point, I would have by far preferred if they had altered his design in the anime so that it'd be easier to, well, animate. As it stands, he might have a similar design to the manga version, but he lacks so much of its presence and looks sorely out of place a lot of the time. Once again though, the music and voice acting are splendid, but one thing I noticed here is the restraint. I'm thinking of episode 55, Midnight Sun. You know which one I'm talking about, the Serum Bowl, the Armin versus Erwin question that has plagued the fan base for years. It contains only 2 pieces of music throughout, one towards the middle and one towards the end. Otherwise, it's entirely silent. To me, this feels so exposing. There's no music to sway your emotions this way or that, to cover up any sort of performance that might be there. It's all down to the various voice actors' abilities to sell these characters to you, and oh boy, do they sell these characters. The episode has this dense, terrifying atmosphere that obviously suits the events of the story very well here. This will forever be one of my favorite episodes of television, and that is in no small part due to the voice actors' absolutely incredible performances and emotional range, as well as fantastic restraint as far as music is concerned. I enjoyed this part of the manga, but I enjoy it even more in the anime. And oddly enough, that's basically all I have to say about the presentation. This is largely a polished season with the same fantastic music, voice acting, and animation I've come to expect from this series. But going into this further would simply be me repeating the nice things I've had to say in the previous seasons, and if there's one thing I hate, it's repeating myself. It's repeating myself. Season 3 of Attack on Titan is split into 2 parts, aptly titled Season 3 Part 1 and Season 3 Part 2. Season 3 Part 2 is very faithful to the manga, with few removals or additions to the source material to speak of. In fact, I only noticed 3 things worth mentioning. First, episode 56 has a little bit of an extended section when the characters are roaming through Shiganshina after their fight. The music, along with a few added images, gives a greater sense of Eren and Mikasa looking back on their lives and remembering what they've lost. Second, Ymir's letter to Historia has been shortened because we already went through a lot of the stuff that would have been in that letter in Season 2. Third, there's a good chunk of cut dialogue between the Owl and Grisha, where the Owl goes into more detail about Eldia's use of pure Titans as weapons of destruction, about how most of the world thinks it would be better to kill all the Eldians than to leave them alive, and about what Marley will be able to do if they capture the Founding Titan. I wouldn't say any of this elaboration is exactly necessary, as this is all information that can be inferred or that we'll learn more about later, but I still think it's a shame it was cut. At this point in the story, it's nice to have more detail about the Marleyan and Eldian dynamic. That's it though. Plot-wise, that's all I've got to say about Season 3 Part 2. So yeah, pack your bags, head on your way, we're done here. That's it, that's everything, nothing more to see. Except, there is one more thing. Season 3 Part 1. Where Season 3 Part 2 is the most straightforward adaptation of Attack on Titan I've yet covered, Season 3 Part 1 is by far the most different. Because Season 3 Part 1 has gone through some major restructuring. For example, let's look at Season 3's first episode, which is the 38th episode of the series overall. We begin with a scene from Chapter 90, which, taken out of its context, is quite cryptic and intriguing. Basically, it's being used as a hook here, as a way to get the audience curious about what's coming up. Then we move to Chapter 51, then 53, then an anime original scene, then some stuff from chapter 52 is merged with stuff from chapter 54, then there's a scene from chapter 52, followed by stuff from chapter 54 and 53, and finally the episode ends off with a scene from chapter 57. So yeah, that's a lot of jumping around, and this isn't a one-off episode that's like this. No, episodes 38 through 43 are all similarly scrambled up, with events rearranged and repurposed or parts from conversations getting melded together. Meanwhile, the 6 episodes following these are relatively straightforward adaptations of the manga's material that generally follow the same order of events presented in the manga. So the obvious question, why were these changes made? Well, fortunately, we have some answers. Because on July 24th, 2018, Isayama released a blog post where he reveals that he was dissatisfied with volumes 13 through 16 of the manga, or chapters 51 through 66. And that's a big chunk of this arc. He goes on to say that he discussed potential changes with the anime's staff members, and expressed hope they could appropriately rearrange the sections and functions of storylines in these volumes. Later, in February 2019, Isayama went over the Season 3 changes more in another interview. In particular, it's mentioned here that Volume 13 got the lowest ranking from reader reviews, so he wanted to change some things in the anime. Maybe that's why screenwriter Kobayashi Yasuko wanted to include a certain amount of action sequences in the first episode of Season 3, as revealed in an interview with her on November 2018. Beyond that, she also mentions that Isayama felt that reordering things and modifying the first half may be for the best. Alright, so it seems like Isayama wanted some sort of changes, but this is where I need to be careful. See, beyond this, I haven't been able to find anything where Isayama specifically mentions what he disliked about these volumes of the manga. Instead, he speaks in general, vague terms, referencing the manga's reception and his own fatigue. As such, I can't say whether the changes made in the anime were all changes he wanted or not, even though he was definitely open to changes. Also, and probably more importantly for this comparison, Isayama's opinion of this arc doesn't really impact my opinion. Even so, I wanted to bring this stuff up here because whenever I see these changes discussed, someone pipes up saying, "Hey, Isayama wanted that, you know?" So I felt like I should do some research and see what I could find. All that being said, I think the anime's creators did a pretty good job of reordering events and making things more exciting at the start of the season. Honestly, moving all this stuff around, it seems like it would make things pretty confusing, but that's not the case at all. At least not for me, and I watched the anime version of events before reading the manga. Everything was still comprehensible, there was still a good dose of excitement and intrigue. It made sense. I liked it. The creators wanted to make things more action-packed and exciting out of the gate. They succeeded on that level, and I appreciate that. However, something else unfortunate has happened here. Something dastardly, frightening, disturbing. The scariest words to ever enter a manga fan's ears, sending shivers down spines worldwide and crushing hopes and dreams each time it's uttered. Cut content. Sometimes I don't mind cut content. There are certain cases where events or ideas that work in a manga might not translate over to an anime all that well. But unfortunately, I don't think that's the case with the vast majority of the content that's been cut from the first part of Attack on Titan's 3rd season. So after a whole lot of reading and rereading and note-taking and highlighting and questioning my own existence because everything's really mixed up here, I've organized these cuts into 5 important sections. First off, in both the manga and the anime, the story shifts in a decidedly political direction, where the Survey Corps confronts the king inside the walls. Naturally, that means that we learn more about and see more of various problems that run rampant in this society. While the anime certainly still shows us some of those problems, we see a whole lot more in the manga. Let's start here. In both versions of the story, Demo Reeves decides to work with the Survey Corps because he thinks Levi and the rest of the Corps will do a better job of looking after the general populace, his employees, and his other interests. However, the way this happens is different. See, in the anime, they have a brief discussion about Reeves' capture, and just like that, Reeves has joined the team. Meanwhile, in the manga, Levi takes Reeves up to the top of the wall overlooking Trost. He uses this opportunity to talk with Reeves about Eren's importance, specifically bringing attention to the fact that Eren's the one who plugged up this hole in the wall. Then Reeves talks about how he didn't make any sort of actual deal with the interior MPs. He was just following orders because otherwise, he and his employees would lose everything. By extension, the general populace would suffer too. Through this conversation, we clearly see that Reeves has no interest in working with the MPs. Rather, he's being forced to. From here, Levi agrees to give Eren and Krista to Reeves, under the condition that Reeves will work with the Survey Corps to trick the MPs, trust them, and give them priority access to rare or luxury food, drink, or other products. This wins Reeves over, and he agrees to work with them. The difference here is clear. Sure, in both versions we've basically reached a similar end result, but in the manga we've gotten a much clearer sense of the struggles that plague Trost's people. Basically, we've got a better sense of the wider social and political problems. As such, Reeves' decision to join the Survey Corps feels far more carefully considered, and more importantly, we get a better sense of why taking down the corrupt government is so necessary. Of course, due to the reordering of events, this conversation couldn't have been kept exactly the same. After all, in the anime, Eren and Krista have already been captured, so Levi can't exactly give them to Reeves. But a lot of the discussion and the dynamic between Levi and Reeves could have been kept intact, in order to highlight the problems inside the walls, and make this agreement feel more like a partnership. In a similar vein, the anime cuts out these thieves as well, which prompts Erwin to say that he didn't think the royal capital was in such bad shape. Niall then replies with, "It's the same everywhere. Even if you try to crack down, the holding cells are already overflowing." Again, these are specific effects of the current leadership's incompetence. Something needs to change. The manga also shows other specifics about how people view politics and the government's various branches. Particularly in Chapter 53, random people in Trost get up in Levi's face, blaming him and the Survey Corps at large for their ill fortune. Additionally, Pixies later discusses how people will not simply accept the Survey Corps if they overthrow the government. No, he thinks they'll need a new king or queen to serve as a royal figurehead for the nation. Then there's the stuff with the Berg newspapers, where we see arguments between Roy and his employee and the outcome of the honest article they publish. Some of this is kept in, but a good amount is cut. In particular, the manga shows other reporters talking about how the Berg's honest publication emboldened them. These things individually might not seem like that big of a deal, but altogether, all of this, the hatred of the Survey Corps, Pixies discussing the royalty's importance, and the conflict at Berg newspaper, it places an emphasis on a simple but important fact. The people's feelings need to be taken into consideration here. Simply overthrowing the government isn't enough because a lot of people hate the Survey Corps and have grown complacent with the current system. So the Survey Corps needs backing, and they only manage to succeed because they get some of that backing. However, I need to be fair to the anime here, because the anime doesn't simply cut the stuff out and leave it at that. Instead, some of it is replaced. In episode 38, for instance, Levi still walks through this crowd of people along with the other members of the Survey Corps. While he doesn't get harassed, he does see the MPs announcing that King Fritz is handing out food from the royal family's reserves. Following this, we see Rod Race explaining himself, stressing the importance of having people on royalty's side right now. So yeah, the anime cut out some of the people's hatred of the Survey Corps, but it used this as an opportunity to make the royalty seem craftier, and to give us a bit of Rod's personality and ambitions earlier on in this section of the story. Overall, I like this added scene quite a lot for those reasons. However, I still wish we saw more of people's hatred of the Survey Corps, along with Pixie stressing how hard it will be to overthrow the government without a member of royalty backing them. Those details fleshed out the world of Attack on Titan by putting the people within the walls at the forefront of the conflict, along with the Survey Corps, royalty, and MPs. Even if the anime makes an attempt to fill in the holes here, I don't think it quite succeeds at getting the same feel. There are still more additions though. Specifically, the anime adds in references to Clause 6 of the Humanity Charter, which is that no one will prioritize one's own gain over the safety and longevity of humanity. This clause is used against Erwin in an attempt to have him sentenced to death. From here, the conversation between Erwin and the leaders focuses more on the Survey Corps trying to keep Eren for themselves, while in the manga, the leadership instead focuses on the Survey Corps' actions, mentioning how Levi has killed members of the military police and how this opposition to the royal government can't be tolerated. Of course, Eren's mentioned in the manga as well, but it's only in passing. As such, we can see how the anime and manga are choosing to structure things a bit differently, and I actually prefer the anime here. I love how the clause is being used. It's an added layer of corruption, with the leaders twisting a seemingly reasonable charter to suit their own ends. Meanwhile, I think focusing more on Eren here is a good decision in the long run, considering how much everyone fighting over him and his own responsibility will weigh on his mind. Overall though, while I think the additions to the source material present here are strong, the cuts are unfortunate, The longer, more detailed conversation between Reeves and Levi, the further emphasis placed on the collapsing society, people harassing Levi and badmouthing the Survey Corps, Pixies talking about the general populace's position and the importance of royalty, extra emphasis on the Berg newspaper and the impact of their article. All of it makes for a richer conflict that focuses more on the problems within the walls in concrete ways. And I really miss that stuff in the anime. While the Survey Corps does questionable things in both versions of the story, the manga definitely brings more attention to that fact. First, the scene where Hanji and Levi torture this guy is longer in the manga. As such, we see far more of their violence. While it's certainly uncomfortable in the anime, it's far more uncomfortable here. Second, there's the scene where various members of the Survey Corps talk about what they've been doing as they listen to the torture. Of course, Eren and Historia have been outright removed from this scene due to the reordering of events. So we don't get Eren saying that they have to do this because otherwise humanity is just going to be eaten by Titans. That's a shame. But Armin also has a speech where he considers ways they could manipulate the masses into siding with the Survey Corps. After which he simply says he's just kidding, just a goof, guys. Here we get more of Armin's struggle with his identity now that the line separating right from wrong is blurring. Third, in the anime, Levi's group attacks this checkpoint and captures this mustache MP there. This guy goes on to berate them, saying that the checkpoint was full of fresh recruits who couldn't properly fight. Meanwhile, in the manga, Levi's group attacks the Interior Brigade compound, which is full of unarmed MPs and, more importantly, innocent servants. Again, this makes the manga's version of Levi, and by extension the whole of the Survey Corps, more violent and morally questionable. Fourth, the manga has this brief but important conversation on top of the wall. Here, Mikasa, Jean, Connie, Sasha, and Eren talk a bit about what's gone on. In particular, Jean, Connie, and Sasha are upset. So upset, in fact, that Sasha doesn't want to eat, which is just... that's her whole thing. She eats. Her not wanting to eat is like Mikasa not wanting her scarf, or Armin not wanting to see the outside world, or Jean not looking like a horse. Either way, that, combined with Jean's solemn words, gives a real sense that fighting people is still weighing on their minds. They haven't quite acclimated to this, and who knows if they ever will. In other words, the brutality of it all has had an effect on them. While that's definitely present in the anime, this scene does a great job of highlighting that fact. It also doesn't help that some earlier scenes where the Survey Corps discuss their doubts about what they're doing have been shortened or cut out in the anime. Unfortunately, for reasons I'll get into more in the next video in this series because spoilers, I think removing this stuff is a mistake. Considering where the story's gonna go, showing what the Survey Corps is up to and the bad side of that, placing a lot of focus on it, that's important. And the anime definitely does that, don't get me wrong, but the manga does quite a bit more. Now, I've already gone over some changes related to Erwin with this whole humanity charter deal, but there's more. Some other stuff is similarly related to Erwin, but not really about him. For example, there's this moment where Levi presents a choice to Hanji, run or fight, and she wants to do both. In the manga, Levi says, I guess that's exactly what Erwin would say, which relates to her taking over for him in Season 3, Part 2. But other changes are a lot bigger than this. In particular, two important parts of Erwin's conversation with Pixies are cut. First, Erwin has this monologue where he talks about how ignorant he is and how, for all he knows, the Survey Corps could be the ones who deserve to lose. However, he also says that, until the answer is revealed, even if I'm in the wrong, all I can do is press on, following my own beliefs and morals. Here, we're getting a sense that, even though he thinks this could be good for humanity, that's not why he's doing it. He has his own goals in mind. Now, Erwin has a similar discussion with Zackley after the coup is successful. There, they discuss their selfish motives for overthrowing the government. However, the specifics, context, and tone of these conversations are different enough that I feel they both serve to strengthen Erwin's character and highlight his commitment to his ideals and goals in different ways that are both worth showing. The other important part of this conversation that was cut out comes here, where Erwin explains many of his reasons for believing that humanity's memories could have been altered. Of course, we still have his story with his father, but this isn't linked to Eren controlling the Titans in quite the same way. Overall, this makes anime Erwin's reasoning feel a little flimsier than manga Erwin's, and I liked it more when I had a clearer understanding of the exact connections Erwin was drawing and the way he was thinking this through. To me, admittedly, these cuts aren't quite as big of a deal as the other ones I've discussed so far, Even so, this content that's in the manga makes me prefer the manga's portrayal of Erwin over the anime's. Kenny, good old Kenny, a big boy antagonist in this arc, and quite the fresh man. Also, a victim of the cuts. But that's not all the anime does with him. First, the anime brings Kenny to the forefront of the season, having him appear at the end of the season's very first episode as he attacks Levi. Meanwhile, in the manga, this confrontation occurs 7 chapters into the 20-chapter-long arc. This change makes a lot of sense to me. After all, the Kenny-Levi relationship is key to this arc. Of course, putting it earlier means that we get a nice action scene at the end of the first episode and beginning of the second episode, instead of waiting till the 3rd or 4th episode to cover this material. But this isn't the only way the anime gives the Levi-Kenny conflict more focus. After all, when everyone's fighting underground, the anime adds in another fight between them. While this didn't build on their relationship much to me, it is nice to see them duke it out, and as usual, the presentation is splendid. Beyond that, it is admittedly satisfying to see Levi come out on top after their previous encounter didn't go so hot for him. Levi! If these were the only changes, then I'd be singing the show's praises as far as Kenny is concerned. But there are 2 things missing from the anime. First, the exclusion of something seemingly small that I have a hard time understanding. In both versions, Kenny has this conversation with his grandpa where they discuss the persecution of the Ackerman family. The anime's conversation is shortened, but all the major beats and details are kept in. Until the end, that is. In the anime, after hearing his grandpa talk about the king's inability to control the Ackermans and erase and alter their memories, Kenny simply says, hence the persecution. So he quickly accepts the explanation, which always felt strange to me. I mean, fair enough if he trusts his grandpa's word, but he just got told something that's pretty wild and crazy. I would expect him to be at least a little bit surprised. And in the manga, his reaction is very different. He says, I think, no, what was that? That was not an accent. That was a terrible idea. He says, I'll believe the story of yours. Things will be more fun that way. Which I love. It's such a cool character moment and it shows us so much about him. Kenny's the type of guy who will accept a crazy story, not because he even thinks it's true, but because it's more interesting to act as though it's true. I know this will probably seem small to some, but I genuinely care about this line a lot. This stands as a great example of how removing a couple important sentences can have a relatively significant impact on a character's personality, and on my enjoyment of that character. The next cut is much chunkier though. This is where Kenny talks with Historia after Rod tries to get her to turn into a Titan and eat Eren. In both versions, Kenny asks Historia whether she's forgotten everything Rod has done to her, and assures her that Rod is only interested in her blood because he doesn't want to turn into a Titan himself. But in the manga, Kenny has a lot more to say, and he's far more intense and outwardly upset. He tells Historia that Rod tried to hide the deaths of his children, to hide the Titan's power being stolen, that Rod did that to protect his status and power, and that he only spoke up after Eren transformed. That Rod doesn't give a crap about her or anyone else. Then he focuses more on events that have specifically affected Historia, on Rod choosing to sleep with a house servant and ignoring her. He echoes her own thoughts, telling her that everyone wished she hadn't been born, including Rod, and that Rod only came running to her because everyone else he could run to was already dead. Overall, the anime version definitely gets the main point across, but I didn't get anywhere near the same feel from Kenny's character. Basically, the anime works to progress the plot and to give us the major beats and ideas of his character, but the manga works to make me truly believe that Kenny is angry about this. The fact that this brutal character cares so much about this, it's intriguing. It makes him more complex. It got me curious about what was going on with him, and it made me really happy when we cut back to his backstory. But if you think about it, this cut doesn't just affect Kenny. No, it also affects... At the end of my last Attack on Titan video, I mentioned that some of Historia's content was cut from the anime, which was a shame. I liked that scene. Enjoyed it a lot. I thought it added substantial stuff to her character. And unfortunately for all of us, the shame train continues. First, there's this exchange between Historia and Connie, where Connie expresses his frustration with Ymir for distracting him from his Titan mom speaking. Of course, he sees this as cruel, but Historia justifies Ymir's actions, saying that she thought it would hurt you if you learned the truth about your village. Connie understandably doubts this, but Historia simply says, "I know her," and that's that. To me, this section is meant to show that Historia is still holding on to Ymir, despite the fact that Ymir ran away and she's having serious trouble understanding why. Basically, Historia is slowly working through her feelings about Ymir, and this is a fairly important part of that process. In the anime, meanwhile, this part is, well, you know what happened to it, it's cut out. And some of Eren and Historia's conversation from chapter 54 is moved here instead, but only parts. See, in the manga, Eren and Historia briefly discuss the strange dreams they have, and then Eren apologizes to Historia, saying that he failed as a Titan. From here, Historia discusses her own doubts and worries, which is in the anime as well, but there's more detail here. She ends off by saying that Eren probably can't understand how she feels, but Eren tells her that he totally understands, that they both live in an absurd world where if they don't do something, they'll lose everything. Here, a key point of connection between Eren and Historia is being established. They're both weighed down by a sense of inherited responsibility in a world that's going to continue to tell them what they need to be. Basically, they both have roles to play, roles that they didn't choose. This is expanded upon further when Historia talks about how no one wanted her to be born, and that everyone must have been disappointed that the real her is so empty. So there's an identity crisis here as well, a crisis that's only going to grow more intense during the underground conflict where she needs to decide what she wants to do, and where she needs to face Eren, this person who seems to understand her on some level, and possibly kill him in order to take his power. Once again, a piece of cut content that, to me, weakens the anime versions of these characters. Similarly, pieces of Historia's backstory are removed in the anime. In particular, she doesn't talk about her realization that her grandfather and grandmother, the people who worked on the farm, the people who lived on the land, everyone would have been happier if she wasn't alive. She goes on to question why her life was like that, lamenting the fact that she didn't even have anyone to ask that simple question to. So there's a bit of a deeper exploration of Historia's suffering as a child. She ruminates on this more. Then there's Historia's underground conversation with Rod. In the anime, she's about to inject herself and get munching, but then she remembers Ymir's words. "So you're trying to do something nice, huh?" And she asks Rod why the race family didn't eliminate the Titans in those 100 years. From here, she realizes that something is up with Rod's story. And then she remembers Ymir telling her to live with pride, and she flips Rod's rockin' bod and sends him flopping hard. This is an amazing moment. I will never stop laughing at Rod here. But in the manga, we get more of Historia's internal debate. She sees herself training with Ymir, as well as this moment where Ymir questions her good deed. But she also remembers a key interaction with Freyda, where Freyda flips out at her for trying to cross this fence. It's a phenomenal moment where Historia recalls a personal interaction that led her to understand that something was wrong with Freyda. That, as she'll say, she was something like a completely different person, possessed by something. So she has an even deeper reason to refuse to take part in Rod's plan. On top of that, we get Historia's internal monologue as she considers what her father is telling her. She then comes to the conclusion that her dad is right, that there's no choice for them but to pray, for her to let God dwell inside her. And besides, that's what her father wants her to be. But then she sees Ymir telling her to live with pride, and she flips him. Again, another case where the manga goes more in depth as far as Historia's backstory and feelings are concerned. Then there's this moment where Historia hits Levi. In the anime, I thought this was kind of a funny little thing. I liked it as a goofy moment. But in the manga, this is built up to in a much different way. After all, there's a scene in chapter 56 where Levi picks Historia up by the collar of her shirt and tells her the scouts are going to force her to take on the role of queen even if she doesn't agree to it. Basically, he threatens her into agreeing to be queen. Pretty much immediately following this, Reeves tells her to smack him once she becomes queen, and Eren eggs her on. On a basic level, this is the setup for the joke of her hitting Levi. So that joke lands a whole lot harder. On top of that though, that exchange between her and Levi once again gives her conflict more depth by showing the sheer intensity of the responsibility being placed upon her. It also feeds into that whole gray morality thing that the Survey Corps has going on in the manga a little bit more. I think you're probably seeing the pattern. Historia's emotions and thoughts about her past are significantly less complex and present in the anime. Overall, I definitely still understand the central thrust of her arc here, but upon reading the manga, I felt so much more connected to her and her struggles. I've said this a number of times already, but yeah, I'm gonna say it again. It's a shame that this was all taken out. I really wish it was still in the anime. So that's it, folks. That's all I have to say about Season 3 of Attack on Titan. Overall, I'd say that I enjoy the manga's take on Season 3 Part 1's material a lot more than the anime, but I do still enjoy Season 3 in general. In particular, I love Season 3 Part 2. Sure, I didn't have that much to say about it since it remains very similar to the source material, but it's just great. I love this section of the story. Either way, I hope you'll stick around for the next video in this series because we are covering Season 4. But first, there's still a sponsorship with Skillshare. If you've watched my videos before, you might have seen a sponsorship for them. They're back again. They have loads of classes. You can learn a whole bunch of new things, develop skills, enjoy your passions, all that good stuff. And it's for a relatively low cost of less than $10 a month. There's also no ads when you have the premium membership, and you can get that membership by clicking the link down in the description below. This week, I decided to check out some of the courses on creativity that Skillshare has. The one that mainly caught my eye is called The Creative Toolkit, 6 Techniques to Spark Original Ideas. Here, the main takeaway I had was just some good ways to brainstorm, come up with new ideas, and visually represent those ideas on a page in a way that's more conducive to remembering them and forcing yourself to come up with more unique ideas than you might have initially thought of. Overall, I definitely recommend the class if you find yourself stuck in a bit of a creative rut and you're looking for ways to spice up your ideas or come up with something a little bit more original. Again, if you're one of the first 1,000 people to click that link in the description, you'll get a free trial. Either way, thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you to my patrons for supporting this stuff. It means a lot, especially with these ongoing series. See you next time. Bye-bye for now.